Last learning objective here for Chapter 9. Learning Objective 7, Changes in Equilibrium, where we'll put this model to good use and understand how various changes in the economy are going to affect the labor market, the unemployment rate in particular. So we're going to start our economy off here, what I call full employment equilibrium. And remember what I mean by that, full employment, is that really just that the unemployment rate is at the natural rate. Okay, so we've got frictional unemployment primarily, perhaps some structural unemployment. And so what I want to look at is what happens if the labor demand curve shifts to the left. And I'm going to look at two cases, flexible wages and downwardly rigid wages, which means that the wage is unable to decrease. So equilibrium wants it to decrease, but it's stuck at its current level. The wage could go up, but it can't go down. So let's start here with our flexible wage case. And I'm going to draw our labor market. Labor on the horizontal axis, wages on the vertical axis. So we've got labor supply curve and our downward sloping labor demand curve. And let's just start ourselves off in, like I said, full employment equilibrium, which doesn't mean the unemployment rate is zero. It means the unemployment rate is at the natural rate. So we'll call that L star. And so what happens here, so I'll try to switch colors. We'll go with blue. And so what happens here is what happens if the labor demand curve shifts to the left. And we'll look at some reasons why that might happen on the next slide. But labor demand shifts to the left. What happens in equilibrium is that the unemployment rate here, well, let's see what happens. So wage rate is going to decrease. And equilibrium employment is going to decrease. So the wage goes down and employment goes down. But since we're in equilibrium, there's been no real change in the unemployment rates. We'd still have some frictional unemployment, but basically the people that have stopped working here have stopped working because they want to. So the quantity of labor supplied is still equal to the quantity of labor demanded in equilibrium. So with flexible wages, employment goes down, but it's really just voluntary unemployment that's increasing, which is just a decrease in the labor force participation rate. So in flexible wages, labor force participation goes down, but unemployment is basically going to stay the same. So let's contrast that to the case where we have wages that are downwardly rigid, meaning they can't decrease. So we'll redraw our labor market here. And so what I want to look at here is downward wage. Rigid. Sorry, I spelled rigid wrong. Which is a bit embarrassing because it's right there on my slide. Okay, so downward wage is rigid, or the wage is rigid in the downward direction. So we're going to draw our labor market here. Labor supply, labor demand. We'll start at the same point, the same W star. So we're in full employment equilibrium, only frictional. And the labor demand curve is going to shift to the left, just as it did over there. The only difference now is that this wage has to stay fixed. It's downwardly rigid, so it can't decrease. So the wage is going to stay at W star. And so the new L, I'll call this L star 3 to distinguish it from the other one, is going to imply a lower level of employment than in the flexible wage case. And notice that now we've created some structural unemployment. Right? So now the unemployment rate has gone up as a result of a decrease in labor demand. So the key differences here, downwardly rigid, so in flexible wages, there's no change in unemployment. But the labor force participation rate is going to decrease. Voluntary unemployment increases. People leave the labor force. When wages are downwardly rigid, what that means is that the wage can't go down. And so as a result, we get an increase in the unemployment rate as a result of structural unemployment. Okay, and so we can see that on the graph. What is structural unemployment is the difference between the quantity of labor supplied and the quantity of labor demanded. So that entire decrease in employment that we see in the downwardly rigid wage case is all going to be an increase in unemployment. That's our structural unemployment. So that's a big difference between the two models, and it's going to be an important one moving forward, trying to explain what's going on in the labor market. And so you may ask the question, well, what is going to shift labor demand? Why did labor demand shift? Well, you can hit the button there and go back to what causes labor demand to shift, but it's really two things. It's either the price changes of the good that we're selling. Now, for the entire economy, which is what we're looking at here, there's really not much that can go on with respect to the price. So for most of what we do, when we think of the entire economy, the price isn't going to matter when we think about labor demand. It's going to be all in the marginal product. So it's price times the marginal product of labor. And so it's going to be changes in the marginal product of labor, which can result from changes in technology, changes in demand for goods and services, among other reasons. So that gives us a sense what shifts labor demand and how that impacts unemployment, in particular when wages are rigid in the downward direction. And so what we want to do now, in the next video that you can log on to and see, is what's going to happen as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic on the unemployment rate. And so we're going to be able to make pretty good predictions about what should happen and have a pretty solid understanding why those